Number 1. I was reminded of this recently, but it happened 10 years ago. I was living in my first apartment, alone. It was a third-floor studio with vaulted ceilings in a huge complex that promoted itself as community, with socials planned and picnic playground areas among the building. Staff would drive around on golf carts waving hi. It felt like a safe place. So, one day I called maintenance because my air conditioning wasn't working. A man came up and looked at it. He was short but kind of wiry looking, maybe late 40s, and leathery, like he spent most of his life in the sun. He was in overalls and had a bushy moustache, all smiles. He was inside my apartment with a screwdriver looking at the air conditioning, and we were making chit-chat. It all seemed innocent until he stood upright and said, "It's fixed," and took a step towards me. He looked me in the eyes while he flipped his screwdriver, suddenly not so friendly anymore. Then he said, "You know what I think? I think you're pretty naive to be living in an apartment all by yourself. Here you've let a strange man in your apartment. You even let me close the door. Anything could happen." I could feel the smile melting off of my face, but I tried not to let on that I was afraid. Then I kind of laughed and said, "That's what my boyfriend said when I told him I was calling you guys. He insisted he'd come over, but he'll be here any second, and you guys have already finished. You'll probably run into him on the stairwell." After all of that, he left abruptly, and I locked the deadbolt after him. I'd lied about my boyfriend coming over, but immediately called him to make it almost the truth. At the time, I thought I was overreacting and didn't mention it to anyone. Looking back 10 years later, I realized just how sinister what he was saying was. Number 2. Now, this hasn't happened to me, but shared with me by my grandmother, whom with I am very close. Years ago, when I was younger, my grandmother and grandfather were talking about when they were kids. My grandmother brought up this one gentleman, Jimmy. Anyways, Jimmy was a very friendly person, always smiling, but not that kind of smile that makes you feel welcome, but a smile of pure disturbance. Jimmy used to try to talk to younger girls, and my grandmother was one of them. He was a young man in his mid-20s who looked for conversation with a crowd much younger, or far from what he could handle. Turns out, Jimmy tried to get people to come over and visit him, mainly younger women. As the years went on, my grandmother moved away. She returned to the area to visit a friend, and found to her surprise that Jimmy was investigated, had his house searched, all due to the smell of decay coming from his house. Turns out, Jimmy was a serial killer. There were many body parts of his victims in the freezer and under his house. He had even stuffed them into his dresses over time. So, to Jimmy, for my grandmother's sake, and to my sake, and anyone else's sake, let's not meet. Number 3. At the time, I was 15 and my mum and sister were away for a few days, so it was just me and my dad. It was a school night, and I was always one to push the limits when it came to going to bed. Around midnight, I was chilling in my room, doing whatever, and I heard someone moving about in the kitchen. Naturally, I assumed it was my dad, as it wasn't terribly uncommon of him to wake up in the night, and I scrambled to turn off the lights and go into bed. My bed was pretty creaky, so this made a little noise, but I just figured my dad would think it was me moving around in my sleep if he heard. My bedroom door slowly opened. It was strange, as I wasn't a little kid, and my dad was usually pretty trusting. But nonetheless, I didn't dare open my eyes. I obviously didn't want to get into trouble for still being up so late. The door stayed open for a long time, probably around 8 to 10 minutes. It was strange enough that I asked my dad in the morning if he came into my room during the night. He was sure that he hadn't gotten up last night, and he has no history of sleepwalking. My theory was that someone may have opened a window, because we often use the windows to regulate the temperature, and might have forgotten to lock the windows that night. But if so, why wasn't anything stolen? Number 4. I am a young female, and I live in a very, very small town. We have a historic district that is about 8 blocks, which is an okay size of a town with older homes. Although this isn't a necessarily great neighbourhood, but I have always felt safe in this town. I was driving my car in the historic area of town. It was 3 AM and I had finished a night of hanging out with some friends from high school. My window was cracked and I heard someone yelling, and since I grew up here and knew everyone, I slowed down to see what was up, assuming that it was one of my friends. As I slowed down, a tall man began to sprint towards my car out of nowhere and reached for the handle. He literally jumped out from between 2 parked cars. I instantly knew that it was not my friends. I panicked. I didn't have power locking doors, and my arms aren't long enough to reach across in time. I floored the car and sped off, running a red light. Town was generally deserted, especially this late, although I saw an elderly woman stop at a stop sign about a block away, and he was running towards her car. Fearing for the worst, I attempted to warn her, and I got on the nearby interstate and called 911. They said that they were sending an officer. I saw the same man riding a bike outside of my house about 10 days later after I got off work. I lived about 6 or 7 miles and about 2 miles from any main roads. This really freaked me out. I checked the papers online to see if any police reports or checks or arrests are posted. None were posted for the night I had called. It's typical for the police to be of little help here. Hopefully, we never meet again. Number 5. One night when I was around 9 or 10 years old, I couldn't get to sleep. It was about midnight, give or take half an hour, and I suddenly heard knocking on the door. This wasn't normal knocking, mind you. It was downright frantic, like the person knocking on the door was trying to escape from someone or something. I immediately ran into my mum and dad's room. Only my dad was in there, because my mum was in this lodge thing since she relapsed. She had schizophrenia. And since my dad also had schizophrenia and depression, we just couldn't cope. So, I woke up my dad and told him about the knocking. Just as I said it, the knocking started again. He got up and rushed downstairs to open the door, but no one was there. A while before, my blinds broke and I didn't have curtains. During the middle of the night, if I got up to get some water or something, I would always notice condensation on the glass, like someone had been breathing on it. I am pretty sure it was the same person who was knocking on our front door that night. Hello everyone, this was day 8 of Shaf-Tober and I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, please leave a comment down below telling me which type of stories you would like to hear more often. As always, stay sinister.